Rebel Moon was already a success for Netflix, but week 3 presented disappointing numbers for the new sci-fi franchise. Hey everyone, welcome back to our movie news. Apologies for the lack of videos in the past 2 weeks. Since the beginning of January, I've been ill, to the point that I even lost my voice for a few days, so I didn't want to rush my return for a video when I wasn't ready to. But now I am back, and hopefully if everything goes well, we should have a couple of videos released in the next week or so. But now let's talk about Rebel Moon. So as you can see from the title, week 3 streaming numbers for Rebel Moon were a bit disappointing. We went from 23.9 million in week 1 to 34 million views in week 2, which was a great increase, but unfortunately in week 3 it's dropped down to 14.8 million views. So in total, in just 3 weeks, Rebel Moon has earned 72.7 million views, which is still a great number to hit, as we talked about in the previous video, that anything above 30 million watch hours is a concrete victory for Netflix, and Netflix's global film chief stated that the streaming service wants big budget films to earn more than 70 million views. And Rebel Moon has crossed that, so the movie has actually surpassed its goal. It's no major hit for the streaming platform obviously, but it is a success. However, there is no denying that dropping from 34 million views to 14.8 is disappointing. Now obviously the movie released at a very clever time, just as people started their Christmas holiday and were off work, so they had more free time to watch movies. And I think the rise it had in week 2, which was just after Christmas Day, shows that once you've seen all your family and friends, you have a perfect time to relax and recover and put on a movie on Netflix, which is why the movie had a great first 2 weeks. And now everyone is heading back to work, the numbers would naturally decrease. But I do think it has dropped quite significantly, a bit more than we had hoped for. I think the timing of it being released isn't as significant as another potential reason why this has dropped so much. And that other reason is because the core audience this film appeals to have already seen it. I think it's just dropped so much because everyone who was interested in it have already seen it, and now it's just picking up the remains of people rewatching it and the rest of the audience who aren't super invested in these films, but they finally managed to get round to it. And I imagine week 4 will be an even larger drop. I predict probably around 5 to 7 million views in its 4th week, which would bring the total to almost 80 million views, which is pretty good. And we need to remember that this is just part 1 of 2, and we technically have 3 more movies to be released, part 2 and both director's cuts, which will contribute to the viewership numbers. What I have only realized until now is that Rebel Moon came out on December 21st, but the first week's numbers say from the 18th to the 24th, meaning that Rebel Moon was able to bring in 23.9 million views in just 3 days. That is a huge achievement, but it also means that these numbers per week aren't as accurate as I thought. If week 1 only counted 3 days, and week 2 counted 7 days, and then week 3 counted another 7 days, then that means each actual week had more views than it's been worded, and it means the movie has been out for less than 3 weeks. It had actually been out for 2 weeks and 3 days. So let's take the first 4 days of week 2's numbers and add them on to week 1's 3 days of release numbers. That would mean 4/7 of week 2's 34 million is 19.4 million, which means that after 7 days of its release, Rebel Moon had around 43 million views. I think wording it that way gives better perspective on the views for Rebel Moon after an actual whole week. But part 1 is factually a viewership success based on Netflix's own requirements, so there is no debate there. But the viewership won't be the only thing Netflix look at to decide if this is a success or not. They will look at the viewership, the critics and audience scores, and probably how long each view watched the movie for. They will need to strike a real balance to decide if it was a success or not, just like I do with YouTube videos. Obviously, views are the most significant thing, but 2 major factors to look at are the comments to see how people react to the video, and the viewer retention, how long people watch my videos for. The video could have hundreds of thousands of views, but if people aren't even making it a quarter of the way through, then I know my video isn't engaging enough and I need to work on that. And the same goes for Netflix. of those 72 million views, how many people watched the majority of the movie? That is something we don't know right now, but that will be something Netflix will look at. As for comments, or in their case critics and audience reviews, that's a difficult situation. Now I could go on and on about how useless Rotten Tomatoes is. I really do not like that site because so many people rely on it, yet I think it is totally inaccurate to how general audiences feel about these movies. Thor: Love and Thunder managed to get a 76% audience score. That's all I need to say. I think about 99% of general audiences don't go onto websites to review movies. For me, I don't think it should be called an audience score because that audience score is filled with hardcore fans of those movies and people who are invested in movies to a much higher level than general audiences are. So to call it an audience score isn't a fair title in my opinion. Look at the number of reviews these films get too. Compare that to their box office or viewership counterparts, and it is a tiny minority of the total number. And that number is decreasing. Less and less people are reviewing films on Rotten Tomatoes. Rebel Moon, 5,000 plus reviews, yet had 72 million views. Thor: Love and Thunder, 10,000 plus reviews, yet over $700 million at the box office. Even at their best moments, Captain America: Civil War, 100,000 reviews, yet made $1.1 billion at the box office. They are tiny numbers compared to how many people actually watched them. Sure, the majority may agree with some of these scores, but it's called the audience score when it's only a minority of the audience rating the film. And those who are rating the film already are far more engaged with that movie or genre than the average audience member. So it doesn't give a fair representation of how audiences perceive these films. So as for Rebel Moon, what I will say is whilst I think most of the general audience would probably think the movie was good to average, so a 5 or 6 out of 10, the fact that it got 72 million views in 3 weeks shows it is of interest to audiences. You don't get that if your movie isn't interesting to people. Now what I think will show if the movie was really enjoyed by people is the viewership numbers of Part 2. That is what will show if audiences liked Rebel Moon the most. Not the audience score, not the critic score, not even the viewership for Part 1, but if people turn up for the second one. If that movie flops, then you know audiences don't care for this franchise. However, if it is a success and does as well, if not better than Part 1, then you know people were not only engaged with the movie, but also the franchise as a whole. Yes, you can take a glance at the critics and audience scores, but to use that as your deciding factor as to whether or not it was a success, I think is a very bad decision. Just because the minority of the total audience rated the movie as good or bad on a website doesn't mean that is the deciding factor. That's like looking through Twitter to decide if a movie is good or not. If Part 2 does well, it will be because the trailers were enticing and Part 1 engaged the audience to the point they are coming back for more. Not every movie has to be a critical success to be a success. They don't have to be masterpieces to be enjoyed. Look at the Transformers films. From the first movie to the third, the box office increased every time, even hitting $1 billion with the third movie. The Rotten Tomatoes numbers were very, very bad, but they made a ton of money. Now, no one is trying to push them for the best screenplay at the Oscars or something like that, but it was very clear that audiences just liked those movies. Otherwise, the box office wouldn't have increased with every release. When the numbers dropped, then you have to reevaluate what you are doing, which is what they did with Transformers and what they will do with Rebel Moon if Part 2 has far lower views than Part 1. But in just 3 weeks, Rebel Moon earned 72 million views. Its third week had less than half the views of the second week, but due to its first 2 weeks, the movie was able to be a success. Whether or not the franchise is a success really depends on Part 2's numbers. Now, do you think Rebel Moon Part 2 will be better or worse than Part 1? Personally, I think Part 2 looks better than Part 1. It looks more action-packed and feels like it will have a larger scale. I also think it will look better visually. The main battle happens on Velt, which was filmed at a real location where they built an entire village, so that will help a lot with selling the realism of the battle. Whereas Part 1's final battle was predominantly green screen. Overall, I think Part 2 2 looks like it will be the better movie, just because we've been introduced to all the characters now, which means part 2 can really accelerate the story more. You no longer have to focus on introducing members of the team, and now you can just get to know them more and develop this story further. I think we will learn a lot more about this universe in this next movie, and I'm excited to see what they do. So make sure to let me know what you think of part 1 streaming numbers and your expectations for part 2 streaming numbers in the comments below. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon, so until then, have a great day. Bye!